Hello, and welcome to the Digital Photo Academy. This is Asif Raza. In this video, we're going to be looking at the use of various tools. And once again, please let me remind you, we will be looking at these tools from a photographic perspective in the sense that we are exploring tools that relate to photography, which means editing, compositing, or whatever that it may be. So to start off, now that we have some understanding of the toolbar and how we can customize it if we need to from a previous video, let's just begin. The more important tools that probably should be talked about in some detail would be some of the selection tools, and there are a variety of selection tools. To begin with, the most obvious one here is the rectangular marquee tool. And what does it do? And within that, there's the elliptical marquee and the single row and the single column marquee. So let's look at each one of them. So if I chose the rectangular marquee, now at the top, I have choices of what can I do with it. So the very first, this is the default behavior. This will allow me to create a selection. And the selection has a feathering of 7.6 pixels. So how do I know what the behavior is? So as I hit delete, you will notice that the edges are a little soft. They are a little feathered because there was a feathering of 7.6 pixels. So if I undo this for a moment and I put my feathering to 0, let's see what it does now. Now you will notice that the edges are very crisp and sharp. So this is what feathering is about, and this allows you to create very specific geometric selections at a very basic level. So now that we know that this can do this, I can now add to this selection. So I can go to add selection and I could say, hey, let's make a selection that looks like this. So the overlap disappears and it sort of blends with itself, and this gets added. By the same token, I can continue changing my selection options in terms of, let's say I go to the elliptical marquee and I'm still in the add to selection. So I could now, in this very straight rectangular selection, choose to add a elliptical shape as well. Then beyond the adding to the shape, there is subtract from selection. So what I can do is, if I decide, no, I would love to subtract this selection, and there we go. So it has subtracted. What this does is it allows us to create different shaped selections in a sort of geometric manner. And this is exclude from intersect with selection. So if I said, okay, I have a circle here and I draw a circle here. So guess what? Wherever I drew, everything else has been taken away and just that remains. So, you can keep going back and forth with different aspects of it. And I say, no, I'm going to add in here and make that. And there's nothing stopping you from adding feather to a new selection. So let's say, for the sake of it, I add. So notice everything else is nice and crisp edged corners, while this has feathering. And what happens if I delete it? So wherever I had feathering, it has feathered itself. Where I did not have feathering incorporated into my selection at the level of my options bar, there is no feathering here. So this is how this selection part works. Now, then you have a single row and a single marquee. So single row literally means you can select a single pixel row. And by the same token that we have the row, we have the column. So you click and drag and it creates a single column. And if I hit delete, what happens here? You will notice that I have literally taken 1 pixel away. Then you have the lasso tools. So there's the lasso tool, which is a freehand lasso. Then you have a polygonal lasso and then a magnetic lasso. Let's see what the behaviors are. So if I start with the lasso tool, once again, please pay attention that at the top you have exactly the same options that we had when we were working with the rectangular marquee or the elliptical marquee, okay, with minor variables. So I can again feather it. I can again start with the new selection, add, subtract, exclude, whatever that I may wish to. And whatever you do, explore it and see how it works. So I can literally, if I'm a illustrator or I just want to do a freehand selection, I can do a rough selection and then work from there. And this would be my selection. And once again, you have the ability of going back and forth between tools and say, hey, I want to add this here. So notice how it is being added. So you can actually work with interesting selections. But the more interesting one, polygonal lasso. What the behavior is, again, similar options available. You don't sort of click and drag anywhere. It doesn't do anything. Okay? So what you need to do is let's say I am in here and I wish to select some of these spaces. So for whatever reasons, I wish to select this white space here. So I see there's a bit of feathering. I can always modify it. So I click and let go. And then I drag it to the next point, click and let go, click and let go, and you go around the shape that you wish to select. And once you arrive at the point of origin, pay attention to the cursor. You will notice that as soon as I meet the point of origin, there's a little circle that comes up next to the cursor icon. That means that your selection is closed, because without a closed selection, there will be no selection. Or what you can do is when you arrive at the last point, you simply double click and it will attract itself and go link with the point of origin. And there's my selection. And you can continue making multiple selections by simply adding or subtracting, or again switching between different selection tools. I hope this is making sense. So I'm deselecting, and what I'm doing to deselect is I'm using a keyboard shortcut, which would be Control D on a Windows computer and Command D on the Mac. Or you can always go into the select menu at the top and say deselect, which is currently grayed out because I've already deselected it. Okay. Then we have the magnetic lasso. And with the magnetic lasso, there are a few other options you will notice besides the add, subtract, and whatever it may be, and the feathering. So there's something called width, and there's contrast, and there's frequency. So let's first see what is the behavior. So what it does is, Photoshop has become pretty intelligent, and one of the things that it does is with the magnetic lasso is it actually looks at the dynamic range and tries to follow that path. So let's say I click in here and I let go. I am not moving the cursor as yet. But if I start moving the cursor along, notice my cursor is slightly below the line. And it is by itself creating these nodal points. And I'm trying to create this selection, and I'm just gently going around, and it's trying to intelligently pick up, and then as soon as I come back to the point of origin, the circle shows and I click, and that's my selection. Now what happens if we change the width and the contrast for a minute? So let's say I increase my width radically just for the heck of it, and I do this. So now you notice the selection is not behaving as accurately as it was the earlier attempt, because now it's looking at a much broader range of tonal values. And if I said, hey, let's keep it to, let's say, 5 pixels. So I've got it at 5 pixels, and I start off, and now, and I'm moving fairly rapidly, it's still creating a reasonably accurate selection. And contrast literally looks at the contrast dynamics within the space that you're working with, how much or how little, and frequency is looking at the relative distancing of the nodes that it places for its own sensitivity and accuracy purposes. And once again, when you create the selection and the selection is done, you can always add to it, subtract from it, or go to a different selection tool. And add or whatever you want to with regards to the selection. So these are the three lasso tools. One is the freehand, the other is the polygonal, and then the magnetic. Okay, and just remember that you will always have options with each one of the tools that you need to be aware of. What is probably very commonly used in photography in the Photoshop world are some of these selection tools, the next set that we're talking about. There's the object selection tool, there's the quick selection tool, and the magic wand selection tool. So magic wand selection tool has been in the Photoshop arsenal for a very long time. Then came about the quick selection tool, and then nowadays the object selection tool has been very well refined. And they have some very good advantages to them. So let's begin with the quick magic wand tool. There's the standard options with the other selection marquee and the other selection tools. Sample range. This determines, again, when you choose a starting point, what kind of color dynamics and contrast dynamics is it looking at to create a selection. Tolerance is something further refining the same behavior. Contiguous, basically it will look at the neighboring space and see how much of that space it needs to encompass within the selection, and then sample all layers. So if you're working in multiple layers, you could create a single selection through multiple layers. So in this case, just for a moment, I'm going to pick on the most obvious red here. So all I'm going to do is click once and I let go. So notice how it has left some blotches in here. Now, if I unselect it and for a moment I say let's use a 3x3 average and let's a lower tolerance of, let's say, 2. When I click, it just picks up on a dynamic space which relates to the point where I had clicked. Okay, and if I leave everything alone, and if I still pick a 3x3 average, and 3x3 is referring to a 3 pixel by 3 pixels, but I increase my tolerance, let's say I go to about 70. Let's see what happens. You notice it picked up the whole space. But interestingly, if I go back and reduce my tolerance to, let's say, where I was, 3 pixels, but I change my average to 31 by 31. Let's see what the behavior is, and I'm simply clicking. So you notice how the tolerance has changed it, and 31 by 31 was the average pixel space, and it looked at the colors and contrast dynamics and then picked up on that selection. Remember one thing, when you're using the magic wand, you need to be aware of what the variables are and what variable may work for you. Okay, so if I've got an 11 by 11 tolerance of 14, that's the difference. Now I can always add more to this selection by simply clicking over here, or I could press the shift key, and watch as I press the shift key, my cursor then shows a plus symbol with it, and I can simply continue clicking and working in adding. But this still takes time. So the smart thing would be to understand the mix and the happy blend of the average that you're looking at and what tolerance level you need to be at. So I've increased the tolerance level to 23. If I increase the tolerance level to 32, it is improving. And if I now say, okay, I'm going to use this combination of 31 by 31, slightly better. And increasing this, and there we go. So it's a matter of what works for you. Once again, you can go to add and you can continue adding parts of it. Now, while we are at the subject of selecting colors and tones and contrast ranges, while we have made a selection, there are many other options available to you. So if I said, hey, I've just made this selection, okay, and I'm going to finish adding here. So now I've got a solid selection of this space. I wish to pick up more of the same color tone. So I can go into the select menu, and then I can say, hey, can we please try and see if we can find similar colors. So similar would be the color or the contrast dynamic. So if I come down to similar, let's see what happens. So guess what? It looked at all the red tones in the shoes and everywhere, and it has allowed me to make a selection which I can then further refine if I so desire. So wherever you see these marquees, also known as the marching ants, that is what my selection is. So I'm going to unselect by pushing Command D or Control D, and Command 0 or Control 0 to fit the image on screen, and then take a peek at the quick selection tool. So the quick selection tool is kind of like the magic one, but differently. Again, there we had the choice of tolerance and the average. Here we have the choice of picking up on the brush size and the hardness and the spacing and the angularity of it. And if you're using a stylus, then you can also choose whatever pen pressure and work with that. So watch, I'm still going to select, let's say I wish to pick on the blues in here. So I've chosen a 76 pixel brush, and I click, and I can just drag it along my canvas until I find whatever selection that I was looking for. Okay, so now we have a fairly large brush, but if you were to explore the possibilities of, let's say, reducing the brush size and reducing the hardness of the brush, let's see what happens. So now it's still doing the same thing, but it's doing it a little differently in the sense that it's paying a little more attention to smaller spaces. So once again, what is it that you're wanting to do? How is it behaving? This quick selection tool allows you to work with that. And once again, you can add or subtract from the selection. So if I wanted to reduce something, I could, let's say I don't want this, so I could come in here and just click on it and it'll subtract it. I want to add this part, so I can go into plus and I can add. But again, it picks up on the other tones that are there. So now I have to go and subtract it from there. So I have subtracted it. So this is also one of the ways in which you can create selections within your image space. And then you always have the option of, within the quick selection, of choosing the subject. So if I just clicked on select subject, let's see what happens. So it immediately picks on my subject and surprisingly does a wonderful job. But what if there was more than one subject? Then it'll select both if they were there. And you can then create a mask or an alpha channel or whatever you wish to do. So right now I'm going to deselect it for a moment. So I've deselected because if I'm going to make a selection of a person or an object or a specific thing, then I have the option of object selection tool. And when I come to object selection, I again have the basic options of adding, subtracting, and excluding, and then I have a choice of using a freehand lasso or a rectangle. And once again, I have the options of sampling from all layers, enhance object, enhance edge, and object subtract or not. So you can say, hey, I don't want to subtract, so the selection will be inverted, but that's a non-issue. So what I'm going to show you is two different ways. So currently I'm in the rectangular mode. Okay, so I always have the option of saying select, and the behavior would be very similar to the quick selection tool. Okay, or what you can also do is you can literally click and drag around the space that you wish to make a selection of. So I've got the whole person in there, but what if I just wanted, let's say, a part of it? So what happens? Let's see, it just picked on the face. That's the difference with that. Then you could choose a lasso behavior, and once again the same idea, and again you could literally just go around, follow the contours And if this is very, very useful when you have multiple elements and you're just making selection of one single element in there. So here I just have one person, but let's say I have arrived. So it will make the same selection. But at the same time, if I just wanted to make a selection of just the shoe part, so I can literally just encircle the shoe area, and guess what? It picks on just the shoe. So this is a very useful tool, the object selection tool, and it can be very, very effective. So use it wisely, get familiar with it, and you will become very good at it. While we are at the subject of selections, beyond the toolbar, I mean, there's not a whole lot of other selection tools in here, apparently, but there are other things in here. So if you go to the select menu at the top, there are options. So what are we doing? We have the option of selecting color range, the focus area, the subject, the sky. And then we also can mask it directly, but I'd rather create the selection and then make the mask. So let's see what this color range is about for a moment. And this is a subject in itself. So when I go into color range, it opens up another dialog box. And in this dialog box, there's a drop-down menu where it says, hey, you can pick on some of the basic selections directly, or you can pick on highlight, midtones, shadows, or skin tones, or colors that are out of gamut. And then you have the option of sample colors, so you can actually create your own sample choice. So if I said reds, let's see what happens. So when I say reds, in here, in the preview, you will notice that there's some red tone in the person, on the skin, and then there's reds at the bottom. It picks on that. If we said, let's take on the blues, let's see what happens. So it's trying to pick up on the skies, but because there's no purity, then it struggles with it. So in the cyans, again, the same idea. But what if I said highlights? Let's see what happens. So it's picked on all the tonal highlights, okay? And as it does that, then I have the option of changing the level of sensitivity by using this fuzziness slider and the contrast dynamic. So currently it's in the 190 level range. So I could say, now pick up a different level. So now it's picking up on different levels. So you can actively choose to make selections based on what level range you want. Now, if I'm in the 190s range, what happens when I increase or reduce the percentage of fuzziness? So as I reduce it, it increases the sensitivity, and it just picks on very specific regions within this range. So it's only looking at 4% outside that 194. But if I were to increase it, it changes everything. So there we go. So now if I hit OK, it will basically show me the marquee for those values, levels that exist, that level of information that existed at that level range, and it's picked on that. Now, that's one thing. But then if we go back into color range and said, nah, I want to choose sample colors. Now, I have a choice. So I've got these droppers. So I can come and click in the reds. So as I click in the reds, if you notice, it picks up on the reds. Now, the smart thing is, as opposed to just clicking and letting go, you can also click and drag. Okay? And when you click and drag, it actually looks at an extended range of information and then makes the selection. And then you can always go into add and continue adding by clicking and dragging in that selection region. Then again, you have the fuzziness and the localized color clusters. So fuzziness will do the same behavior that was manifested earlier on. The higher the fuzziness, the less the finesse. The lower the fuzziness, the greater the finesse. And if you say localized clusters, then it really becomes pretty strict and says, okay, I'm going to start looking at very, very carefully. And then you have to play with the fuzziness, increase the fuzziness, lower the range or increase the range, and then see where you arrive at. By the same token, if there's areas that you don't want selected, you also have the option of menu reducing it. So I'll come and click in there, or click in here, or click in here, whatever you may wish to play with. So I can add again, and you can keep clicking and it keeps on refining. You can also have the actual image in here, so you can choose colors very specifically if you so desire. It's all up to you. So you can see how the behavior would be. So here, you can then say, oh, I can clean this up later on, or refine my mask or my selection. But this would be another one of the tools that becomes available to you when it comes to creating refined selections. And perhaps down the road, when we get into creating selections and masking and refining, that's where we'll probably discuss this in greater detail. This video is about explaining to you the behavior of the tool. And then there's the focus area. Okay, so when you click on focus area, then you have an option. It opens up a dialog box, and notice it's still working, so it does take a little bit of time. So it's picked on areas that were in focus, and this can be very useful depending on what you're planning on doing. You can look at it as marching ants. These are all the previews that are available. Okay, it's up to you what suits your needs. So I don't mind looking at it with marching ants in the preview. And then there's the option, do we wish to reduce any noise if there was? How do we wish to output the selection as a layer mask, as a new layer, new document? There's a whole load of options. Again, you also have the ability of physically adding or subtracting from the selection. Okay, so if I said, nope, I want to add this part or subtract this part, just for the heck of it. So I want to add more. So I can always come and click and drag it and see how it behaves and whether it adds or not. So it's added that. Notice it was working. And once it's added it, you could simply say, okay, just make it into a new layer, and it'll just copy the same image and create a brand new layer. You can modify the in-focus range and the noise, or leave it to auto, experiment and explore what works best for you for that particular image. And then in the more recent versions of Photoshop, obviously subject is the same thing as we had in the object selection, so it'll behave in a very similar manner. So if I go click on subject, it picks on the subject. Simple as that. And lastly, this is a kind of cool tool, sky. So Photoshop has become wonderful with sky replacement, and if you wish to modify something, it's pretty easy. You could put a different sky image in the background and come into your base image and say, hey, I want to make a selection of the sky. And interestingly, Photoshop does a pretty darn good job. And if I were to just simply add a layer mask in here and invert the mask, there we go. So obviously I have to do some refinement. I could easily place another sky in the background and the image would still look very realistic. So I am hopeful that this is making some sense in terms of what the basic selection tools are. And this video is nothing but about the basic selection tool. In a separate video, we'll look at a few other tools and their behaviors, which follows after this. Thank you very much and have a great day.